Chender. And it's now straight up noon in Chicago, where I am, and it's clear and cold. Robert, how about in New York? What's it like?
It's warm and rainy.
Ah, that's right. You guys had like 60 degrees yesterday.
That's right.
Oh my goodness. Lucky you. Lucky you. Well, let's dive in. Today we have a special treat because, as you all probably know, listeners, everyone on our team has experience in the industry. So they all know what it's about. They know the nature of professionals in the industry. Robert has an illustrious career in the industry. He's a lawyer by training, but he's been a COO. He's been with hedge funds. He's done a lot of work with investment organizations. So he knows the business cold. And his personal interest and expertise is in this very popular notion of mindfulness. I say popular because more and more organizations ask us, what is this and why would we be interested in it? So I'm delighted to have Robert with us today to explain what it is and why you would care about it. So let me move right ahead, Robert, and let you begin.
Thanks, Jim. Hi, everyone. Glad to be here. Glad to see you all. So what's mindfulness? First off, mindfulness is a skill that anyone can develop. It's the ability to be able to intentionally direct and sustain our attention. Another way to define it is it's the ability to know what's going on inside your head at any moment without getting carried away by it. We're often distracted by tech, by random thoughts, by strong emotions. And what mindfulness does is allows us to make conscious choices about our actions instead of moving through our day on autopilot. And we can train this skill through various techniques, such as mindfulness meditation. It requires some practice. We're exercising our mental muscles, so we need to practice regularly to develop them, just like our physical muscles. And we're going to try it together shortly. So, question is, why is mindfulness important for our industry? So first, and this is the most obvious application, we can become more efficient when we can keep our attention focused on a task, say writing a report, and not moving our attention back and forth from email to screen to report. Second, and this is also pretty clear when you think about it, we can communicate better with our colleagues if we're actually paying attention to and listening to them, rather than thinking of what we're going to say next, or assuming we know what they're going to say and interrupting, or just zoning out. There's an area of business school research called mindful leadership, and a main ingredient of mindful leadership is mindful listening. It's extremely important if we're going to become good or even great leaders. So think about your best bosses. Who were they? And think about what it was that attracted you to them. In my case, one thing they all had in common was that they actively listened to me. I felt heard. That doesn't mean that I got what I wanted, of course, but simply that I was valued. Your colleagues and your subordinates are going to feel heard and validated and will be much more loyal to you than if they think that you're not listening to them. A lot of my coaching, and especially with executives advancing in their organizations, is around how to listen with full attention. In other words, mindful listening. It takes practice and willpower to stay attentive, particularly in, say, a difficult conversation or with someone you find irritating. My coaching clients have reported that learning and practicing mindful listening has been a crucial ingredient, both in their personal success and in improving office culture, not to mention with their spouses. In fact, one reported that his spouse asked if something was wrong because he was actually listening to her, and that wasn't the habit in the relationship. And so third, and this is a key point on the trading desk and elsewhere, mindfulness helps us deal with difficult emotions, including fear. This requires a little bit of explanation. So take the example of watching the screen when there's a sudden downturn in the market that you're in. Fear might arise. What happens to us at that point? Let's look at the neuroscience here. So when we're threatened, and a market reversal is a threat in the same way a saber-toothed tiger used to be a threat, our amygdala gets activated and instinct takes over. The amygdala are the small almond-shaped organs on either side of our brain that process threats and help us physically fend them off by causing us to go into fight, flee, or freeze mode, depending on our personal style. At that point, we're on autopilot because our amygdala hijacked our rational brain. Our prefrontal cortex, which is here, is the part of the brain that makes us human, where we make rational decisions, becomes fuzzy and goes partially offline. So if we're simply reacting to our fear and staying on autopilot, we can make a decision, sell, buy, hold, based on our fear rather than on all the facts. We've all done this. We've certainly seen others do it. But if we can practice mindfulness on the spot, bring ourselves back to the present, we can see what's happened and pull ourselves out of this fight, flee, freeze mode. Various studies have shown that mindfulness practitioners can pull themselves out of an amygdala hijack much more quickly than the control group. So we can decide what to do, we can decide to buy or sell, not based on our fear, not based on our autopilot, but as a result of a conscious choice. So we're moving our actions from compulsion to choice as a result of mindfulness.
Robert, I have one thing to add, and that is there are bits of data now that really support practically the usefulness of mindfulness. And one of them was a meta study that was done with mindfulness practitioners and non-mindfulness. That was the control group. And they studied how the mindfulness people did with 21 well-known behavioral finance traps, like anchoring or conformity bias, all these different ones that we know that cause us to think poorly. And in 21, 18 of them were significantly better by the mindfulness practitioners. They fell into the trap on only 3 of them, and 18 of them, they were better. So that was very direct. And I remember seeing that thinking, wow, this stuff really works.
That's right, Jim. Thank you. And I want to speak a little bit about one of those biases in the connection with risk. There was a very interesting study that showed that as volatility in the markets increase, the cortisol levels of traders and maybe everyone else in the firm also increase. And what cortisol is a stress hormone that increases as uncertainty about the task at hand increases. And it tends to decrease risk appetite. So risk isn't just intellectual, it's physical. Risk by its very nature threatens to hurt us. So we can see this on a primitive level. If we think there's a tiger out there, but we don't know where, our cortisol will increase, and maybe we're going to decrease our risk taking. Maybe I won't go for that evening walk. And maybe people with low cortisol levels did go for the walk and got eaten. So natural selection gave us high cortisol in uncertain times. So if volatility rises for a long period, the prolonged uncertainty leads us to subconsciously conclude that we don't understand what's happening. And then our cortisol scales back our risk taking. So in this way, our risk taking actually calibrates to the amount of uncertainty and threat in the market. So where there's extreme volatility, such as a crisis, traders, investors, and whole companies can freeze up in risk aversion, and this helps push a bear market into a crash. If we can become aware of this unconscious bias by developing the skill to be able to notice what's going on in our mind and our body, just as Jim mentioned, which is mindfulness, we may be able to counter this tendency to freeze and continue to take appropriate risk in a market that, for example, may be underpriced. So we can notice when we're stressed and notice our tendency to decrease risk taking in that situation and make appropriate risk decisions, not because of our stress, but despite our stress. So we're acting not because of the way we feel, but in spite of the way we feel, because we can actually notice how we feel.
Hey, Robert, there's a question that came in. Is mindfulness connected to meditation?
Mm-hmm. Yes, indeed it is. And in fact, we're going to practice mindfulness meditation for the last few minutes of the webinar. So thanks for asking, and you've gotten right to the point here.
Let me also just put in a plug for Robert, having known him for over a decade. Robert doesn't just talk about this, he practices it. And what I mean by that is when I have conversations with Robert, either Zoom or in person, just as he is right now, looking very intently at the screen, he really practices this, and it does make me feel appreciated and validated. Robert, I don't think I've ever had an experience where you interrupted me.
I try not to.
You do very well. You succeed.
Thank you, Jim.
Sure.
So I'd like to mention some other results of practicing mindfulness. And first is that being present and aware is the basis for an excellent culture. And it's a key support for the behaviors of high-performing investment teams. Curiosity, candor, accountability, authenticity, awareness, and appreciation. And there are now thousands of academic studies on the effects of mindfulness practice, and it's very clear that mindfulness helps executive function and decision-making capabilities, helps decrease stress, and promotes greater resilience and well-being. There was a review of the science of mindfulness in the Harvard Business Review, and the money quote there was that mindfulness should no longer be considered a nice-to-have for executives. It's a must-have, a way to keep our brains healthy, to support self-regulation and effective decision-making capabilities, and to protect ourselves from toxic stress.
And Robert, I had a coaching client yesterday who specifically wanted a session on his anxiety, his stress, his being overwhelmed. And I mentioned that meditation is really a wonderful practice, and 20 minutes, say in the morning, 20 minutes in the evening. And he said, this is classic. He said, I don't have time for that. I have two kids. I have a wife. I have a job. I try to exercise. I try to get 7 hours of sleep. The beauty of mindfulness is that you don't need to break from your day to do it. You can do it at your desk.
That's right. And the other point there is that when you practice mindfulness, you might find there's actually more time in the day, because what happens is you're coming back to the present instead of being in the past or being in the future. And if you're in the past or in the future, time can go by and you won't even notice it. If you're present, you'll be right here, and you find that there's actually more time to get things done because you're not distracted all the time. So why don't we go ahead and do the practice? So Jim, this is a slide as to which gives the instructions, and I'll walk you through it. So if everyone could sit up in their chairs, take a comfortable position, and you can have your eyes open or closed. You can look at the screen, or you could simply close your eyes. And what I'd like you to do first is take a couple of deep breaths. And this brings our parasympathetic nervous system online, tends to calm us down. And then breathe normally. And notice your breath as it goes out. Notice there's a little gap at the end. And then you naturally breathe in. Nothing special, the way we always breathe. And what we're just doing now is paying attention to our breathing. And we may feel focused. We may feel open. We may feel calm. Let's try that for a minute or so. And don't worry if it's hard or you get distracted. We'll talk about that in a moment. So maybe we did get distracted. We might have gone to the future, gone to the past. We might have just simply thought about random things. And that's fine. There's no problem here. Mindfulness is not about clearing our mind. Mindfulness is about noticing what's going on at any point in time. So if we're distracted, then at a certain point, we're going to remember that we're practicing mindfulness. And that remembering is called meta attention. It's the quality of knowing that it's the ability to pay attention to whether or not we're paying attention, right? So we're distracted, we're thinking about something else, and then all of a sudden there's a click, and we remember, oh, I'm practicing mindfulness. And then what we do is we simply stop following the story that we're engaged in, let go of it very gently, without any judgment, without being critical of ourselves, and with a degree of kindness. There's no problem here. And then we go back to paying attention to our breathing. So it's a circle. That's why the slide is circular. Attention to breathing, we get distracted. Meta attention brings us back. We act in a way that's not self-critical or judgmental. We come back to our breath. So let's try that for another minute or two. Okay, so that was a little taste of mindfulness. Jim, could you go to the next slide, please?
For sure.
So I just wanted to mention what Focus's offerings are. We have interactive mindfulness programs for companies, for teams, for individuals. And they consist of, we could do a 1-hour keynote or taster session. We have a series of classes to embed the practice in the company or the team. Ongoing coaching, both one-to-one and teams. And in additional, we offer a weekly half-hour team support class where we talk a little bit about mindfulness and then do the practice together.
And
so thanks.
I was going to say, Robert, for those of you who follow us pretty closely, we call this exercise getting to the balcony, where you go to that place where you're no longer in the dance floor doing all kinds of stuff. You're able to observe yourself on the dance floor. You know, what's happening? Are you stepping on toes? Are you tripping over things? You're in that sort of calm place of just witnessing. Thank you, Robert. I'm sure people enjoyed the little, I call it mini vacation, where you let us just forget about the future, forget about the past, and just take that little vacation. We've got a comment coming in here. Thank you. This was great. And I agree. So happy that you joined us.
Thanks, Amy.
On a Friday. We hope you have a great weekend. And for those of you who are regular visitors to Hit It and Quit It, we'll have one on March 17th, Learning to Lead in a Hybrid Environment. And everybody is now working in one, so it's important to know how to manage that. We have another comment here. Highlight of my day, thank you. So again, give yourself this gift of mini vacations. It only takes a minute. You can do it at your desk. You can do it in a meeting. Just watch your breath, relax. I tell myself, just relax, just enjoy letting the whole body, drop your shoulders, just relax and take that minute. It's so pleasant. Thanks again, Robert. Wonderful to be with you, and we'll see you all again soon, I hope.
Thanks, Jim, and thanks, everyone.